Thank you very much for participating. And thank you very much for being present today with all your busy schedules. And let us start the session now. This is a session where we have organized to commemorate World Environment Day, which will be coming very soon. This is on the 5th of June. And IOM Sri Lanka thought of actually joining hands with SLYCAN Trust, which is a renowned policy and advocacy organization in the field of human mobility and climate change. As a long-standing partner, we thought of partnering with them on this great special occasion. So today we have a quite few line of people to discuss, to share their knowledge, experience, and their work in the field of migration, environment, and climate change. So right now you are all aware, like, there are so many things happening in the field of climate change, and people are very much focused to discuss about it and to bring some solutions to save the environment. And then I think it's a good space for all of you to start ahead with. So let me now give the floor to Sanashia to start her icebreaker session. Over to you, Sanashia from SLYCAN Trust. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Rangita, and good afternoon to everybody who's joining us from Colombo, and good morning, good evening to everyone else joining us from world over. So before we maybe start, just a few maybe housekeeping rules I'm sure everyone's very familiar with, but we'll still want to reiterate nonetheless. Maybe kindly do keep your mics turned off at all times. You could leave your video on. It was great to see you and to see whom we are interacting with. But please do keep your microphones turned off or muted at all times, so the session will not be disturbed. Also, if it's possible, please do try to rename yourself with your name, organization, and if possible, country, so we have an understanding of who's in the room. Furthermore, just one more thing. There's a link to the registration form that I put on the chat. And the purpose of the registration form, I know that you all did a pre-registration before this, but this is in case we're taking this discussion further or we're doing another phase of this discussion, we could invite you all for the next round of it as well. Right, so with that, with having said that, I'm just going to put, so we're going to start off maybe with a quick icebreaker on a Mentimeter. So what you need to do is to kindly log on to www.menti.com. 1 second. And please use the code 34010251, and I'll just share my screen so we could probably all see what I'm saying. Right. Please do try to keep yourselves muted at all times. If you have any trouble accessing the Mentimeter, do let us know in the chat and we'll try to help you out. But if not, you could even log into this on your phone. So you just have to go on the website www.menti.com and use the code 34010251. And there should be a little space to enter your name. It could be the names you want to use for the day, or it could be your real name. No one will never know. But yeah, so we currently have 3 participants. We will give it about 10 seconds more and we'll start the quiz. It's a very fun, light-hearted quiz. So the details to enter the Menti is also on the chat. So menti.com and use the code 34010251. All right, so we have a few participants in and we will start off with our first question. So the faster you answer the questions, the more points you also get. So the first question is, what was the total number of international migrants in 2019? This is according to the World Migration Report in 2020. So we have 7 seconds and we have 4 answers. You have to pick one of the 4. Okay, so a lot of people have answered 272 million, and that is the correct answer. So let's see how we are doing. Okay, so we have Skids, Ricky, and Cynthiana on the lead, and we have a few others closely following. All right, so we have two more of these questions. We also have Boti Makbotfest. Welcome to everybody, and thank you so much for joining in. So let's just go to the next question. This should pop up on your screen as well. So again, go on to menti.com and use the code 340102251. So the next question is, how many people have been internally displaced by disasters in 2020? So there are four answers again: 2 million, 9.8 million, 18 million, and 30.7 million. 3 seconds to go. Okay. Okay, so the correct answer is 30.7 million. And let's see how everyone fared. Okay, so we have Tadsha, Ricky, and Cynthiana. So Ricky answered the fastest. All right, so we just have one more question left. Is there a category as climate refugees in international law? So we have three options for this. Yes, no, they are called environmental refugees. No, there is currently no such legal category. 5 seconds left to go. Right. No, there is no current. Okay, and that is the correct answer. A lot of you got that right. Well done. And we'll see how this goes. And that was just that answer. And the overall winner is Tatsha. Well done, Tatsha. Everyone, please react with a virtual clap or some sort of celebratory emoji. But thank you very much. And thank you for participating in a little icebreaker for the day. Hope you all enjoyed that as much as I enjoyed that from this side. Right, so before we just move on to the official introduction, would like to remind everyone to kindly fill in the registration form that we have for the day. I will drop the link to that on the chat once again. But we having said that, thank you once again for taking part and for contributing, and I hope you'll enjoy the rest of your session. Over to you, Rangita.
Thank you, Sanashia, and I think it was a great experience. I guess all of you would feel the same. So let us make this session more interactive and interesting, as well as like through many discussions and sharing your experience and your understanding. So there were some colleagues who just joined. So therefore, I will take this opportunity to formally introduce all of us to all of you. So today, this is a session that we have organized to commemorate the World Environment Day, which is falling on the 5th of June. And as we all know, we all actually talking a lot about the environment and then its degradation, and also climate change, because climate change is like is the most trending word these days. There are so many people working on it, so many groups, so many countries, governments are talking about it. So it's very important to know whether governments are actually working towards it, and are there any international frameworks, are there any international conventions that actually support these sort of activities, as well as um, uh, do people really have some sort of, let's say, a connection seen between migration, environmental degradation, and climate change? Because when climate starts to deteriorate so much, maybe perhaps you will face a lot of difficulties and challenges, so that you might like to move from the place where you have located. So in this sense, IOM, International Organization for Migration, we are one of the leading UN organizations where we try to uh, work in this particular nexus. We work with governments, we work with civil society communities, and we work with wide array of like partners in order to provide them some sort of an understanding to this particular nexus: migration, environmental degradation, and climate change. So this effort is actually a part of it. And today, to make this event so significant, we have also joined hands with the other organization who had been there for quite a couple of times. Like, I mean, they had been such a good partner to all our work in Sri Lanka, as well as they have presence in the world as well. It is SLYCAN Trust, where they have kind of contributed so much into the field of human mobility, environment management, climate change, and all the other related elements in policy and advocacy, as well as research. So let me now open the floor for this particular session. And may I now introduce our first speaker, Cinziana. Cinziana is from IOM headquarters, and then she's actually working for our MEC department, which is MEC stands for Migration, Environment, and Climate Change. We have to hear from her very soon, so let me now give the floor to her. Cinziana, over to you.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. And congratulations for organizing this event, and happy World Environment Day to all of us. It's going to fall on a Saturday, so we can always start celebrating early. I'm going to share my screen now. And Rangita, can you please confirm you see?
One second. Are you difficult to change your slides? Is it difficult to change your slides, Cinziana? Oh, no.
No. Okay. Thank you. So I am Cinziana Pushkash. I am a program officer in the Migration, Environment, and Climate Change Division at the International Organization for Migration. I am here with a few colleagues that work on migration, environment, and climate change. I am not alone. Rangita is the project officer in Sri Lanka. We also have the regional thematic specialist for Asia Pacific, Maria Veger online. So we are quite a big team in Ireland working on this topic. We have specialists at headquarters in Geneva, Switzerland, where I am based, and also specialists in regional offices and country offices as well. I'm saying this just so you know that behind all the work and all the knowledge that I will present today, there's a big team working on it. And also, if you ever want to work with IOM on this topic, there are focal points in most corners of the world if you would like to reach out to us. So today we're going to talk a bit about environmental migration. I'm going to talk through what environmental migration is, what are the drivers of this environmental migration, and then we're going to look specifically into climate change policy and what does this mean for human mobility, and including migration, displacement, and planned relocation. We will hold all questions until the end, but please do take note of all your questions. You could put them in the chat, or you could just raise your hand at the end of the presentation. So to start with, I would like to take you through some examples of environmental migration to give you an idea of what we're talking about. Probably most of you are very familiar with examples of environmental migration. I just want to show you some of my examples. Here you can see a community in Bangladesh, the community of Tirangaj, which is affected by river erosion and which were displaced several times because of river erosion. We also look in the Caribbean region, where hurricanes as well as earthquakes are forcing thousands and millions of people to leave their homes, to leave their loved ones behind sometimes. And for example, last year in 2020, it has been the most active Atlantic hurricane season ever. In particular, hurricanes Laura, Eta, and Iota displaced 2.7 million people. We've also seen in 2010 the earthquake in Haiti, which displaced some 2.3 million people. So these are examples of environmental migration. If we move now to the Pacific region of the world, in the photo you can see an island from Kiribati. And a lot of people in Kiribati and Marshall Islands, over 150,000 live in low-lying atolls, which means they are threatened by sea level rise. And when people are threatened by sea level rise and flooding becomes more common, water salinization becomes common, relocation or seasonal migration are some of the only options left. So having seen these examples of environmental migration, you might ask yourself, okay, what is the definition of environmental migration? There is no internationally agreed definition. There is no legal definition of environmental migration. And in the absence of such a definition, IOM put forward in 2007 a working definition, because we have been working on this topic for decades. Countries are being faced with this topic for decades as well. So we had to call it something. We had to establish a conceptual framework around it. But again, this is a working definition, not a legal definition. So if we look at this definition, if you can read it on the screen, you'll see that environmental migrants can be individuals or groups of people who, for compelling reasons due to sudden or slow onset events and processes that affect both their lives and their livelihoods, are obliged to leave or choose to do so. And they can do so in a temporary or permanently way, and they can move within their country or abroad. This definition is very broad, and this is on purpose. We realized early on that environmental migration is a very complex and a varied phenomenon across different regions and countries, and this encompasses all forms of environmental migration. So when we talk about environmental migration, we talk both about forced and voluntary forms of migration. We talk about migration of proximity, so to the next village, or also of long distance to the next country or region. We also talk of temporary migration or permanent migration. So temporary could be just a bed for the night, being evacuated for a few weeks in an evacuation center due to a hurricane, or permanent migration like we see in the Pacific, for example, due to inhabitability of specific islands. Although I'm presenting here the dichotomous kind of characteristics of environmental migration, you should imagine a spectrum. Migration should be put on a spectrum. Environmental migration is never purely forced or purely voluntary. This is because most of the migration decisions that people take are not that clear-cut. If you imagine a person moving to find a job, you would ask the person, okay, why did you lose the job? Oh, my livelihood has been affected. My crops are not yielding anymore. Why have your crops not worked this year? Oh, because of the drought or because of environmental degradation. And then you can link it back to environmental reasons or to climate change. So imagine a spectrum between forced and voluntary types of migration. And when we look at these characteristics of environmental migration, we could ask ourselves, is then environmental migration a problem or is it a solution? And in IOM, we say that it's both. Environmental migration can be a problem if it puts people into very vulnerable situations. For example, when people are displaced, when people are forced to flee their homes. This can raise issues of protection, of shelter, of identity, of legal identity. But environmental migration can also be a solution. migration for a lot of people is a form of resilience. People move to because they are resilient, because this is a form to adapt to the changing environment around them. They move to find alternative livelihoods. They move to find a better life for themselves. And most of the times, um, the most vulnerable people are those that stay behind, that do not have migration as an option. These are either trapped populations, or it can also be because they do not want to leave their ancestral land. Now we have seen a bit of the characteristics of migration in the context of the environment. So let's look at the drivers of environmental migration. So what are these environmental drivers? We can think of two types of environmental drivers. First, we have environmental events. And in the next slide, we will talk about environmental processes. First, environmental events. Here we look at sudden onset events, things that take seconds or days to materialize, and also slow onset events, things that take weeks to months to develop. We usually talk about slow or sudden onset events linked to natural hazards in four categories. We have geophysical hazards, such as earthquake, volcanic eruption, tsunamis. We also have hydrological hazards, such as flooding or avalanche. Meteorological hazards, hurricanes, typhoons, cyclones, tropical storms, depending on which region of the world you are and how you call them. And climatological hazards. This is where we talk about drought, extreme heat, wildfire. So these are the environmental events, things that take seconds to days and weeks to months to develop. And we talk about environmental changes and environmental processes. These are slow onset processes that take decades to develop, things that are not obvious to the first look at a country. We talk about temperature change, changing of precipitation patterns, sea level rise, land degradation and desertification, of course deforestation as well, ocean acidification, coastal degradation, coastal erosion, and aquatic ecosystem degradation. And as we celebrate World Environment Day, UN leaders will also launch the UN Decade for Ecosystem Restoration. So imagine the effect ecosystems also contributing to shaping migration decisions as well. That's why we talk about ecosystem degradation here. This environmental change can be both climatic and non-climatic. And the adverse effects of climate change act as an accelerator to all these environmental events and processes. We know that climate change can intensify the severity of natural hazards. It can also increase the number or the frequency of natural hazards and of storms. So having looked at the environmental drivers of migration and at the characteristic of environmental migration as well, you might ask what are some figures, how many people are actually being are in this situation. If you look at 2020, just last year alone, as you have seen in the quiz, there were 30.7 million people newly displaced due to sudden onset disasters. And these are people displaced within their country. This number is comparatively higher than displacement linked to conflict. In 2018, for example, we see there were 17.2 million people that were displaced by disaster, and this was 3 times higher than conflict displacement that year alone. If we look at the data between 2008 and 2020, we see that there are over 300 million people displaced due to disasters internally within their countries. Of course, some of these numbers overlap because some people remain in protracted displacement, so they become displaced for longer than a year. And we are starting to account for that in the numbers and the figures that we are putting. And although we know the number of people displaced in the context of disasters and climate change, we do not know the number of people moving because of slow onset processes, things that I mentioned, like environmental change, right? Temperature increase, ocean acidification, land degradation. We do not have a clear overview. And this is not for lack of trying. And this is due to the complexity of environmental migration and of the multi-causal nature of migration, meaning that people don't move for one factor alone, they move for multiple reasons. So we do, even though we don't know this number, we do know that environmental stress has rarely a direct impact on mobility. There are multiple factors and drivers of migration, such as economical drivers, political drivers, demographic, social drivers, that together with environmental drivers come to shape the migration decision of people. We also know that the majority of people displaced in the context of disasters remain within their country, so remain internal, or within the region when they move abroad. It's very rare that we see movement from region to region in the context of disasters. We also know that the most vulnerable and affected countries and populations are those of the least developed countries, the small island developing stage, such as in the Pacific and the Caribbean, and the countries in Sub-Saharan Africa, Southeast Asia, and Central America. Now, looking at the future, we've seen now the status quo, and looking at the future, at the projections, the World Bank is telling us that if we take no climate action, 143 million people could become internal climate migrants by 2050. If we do take some climate action, this scenario could actually improve. If you see the more inclusive development action, this brings the total number between 65 and 105 million people IDPs. And if we are implementing the full climate change policies that we have, we could even reduce this number to 31 to 72 million IDPs. Some climate change that has happened is irreversible, so some people will move regardless of our actions. We also know that land degradation, together with climate change, will impact the mobility decisions of 50 to 700 million people by 2050. We know this from the UNCCD, the Convention to Combat Desertification. The Climate Change Science Authority, so the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, has also looked into the links between climate change and migration. And they say with quite a high level of confidence that there will be migration consequences of climate change, whether in type of displacement or out-migration from agriculture-dependent communities or migration in small island countries. So we know that climate change has an impact on migration. We know that this is a reality already. It's not a scenario for the future. We know that every year people are displaced because of disasters. We know these numbers will increase if we don't take any action. So let's look at what is being done about this at the moment. The main actors that are actually working on the links between migration and climate change are, of course, states as the primary responsibility with their citizens and migrants. We have the UN agencies, such as IOM, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. There's many other UN agencies that are working on this topic as well. So these are the main three. We also have a hybrid actor, the Platform on Disaster Displacement. This is a group of like-minded states. It's a state-led initiative with 17 countries that also works within the UN system. Of course, then we have civil society, which is very active on this topic at advocacy and at operational level. We have universities and academia, which have conducted a lot of research, and they're bringing up the evidence that we need to have evidence-based policies and evidence-based operational activity. And of course, not least, migrants themselves, who are taking action throughout the other actors present above. In terms of the operational approach to answer environmental migration, we usually look at three types of solutions. We look at solutions for people to stay, to be able to stay in their homes, because we know most of the people want to stay at home, want to be able to be with their families and in their own homes. So when we talk about solutions for people to stay, we look at measures such as disaster risk reduction, climate change adaptation and mitigation, resilience building, or community stabilization. We also look at solutions for people to move when there is no other way around it. And these are measures to develop or to strengthen migration pathways, such as free movement protocols like we have in West Africa, for example, or in Central America or in Europe. We look at labor agreements like we have in the Pacific and between certain Pacific islands, or transhumance agreements to facilitate pastoral between different countries. And as a last resort, planned relocation is all help people to move. But this is a highly traumatizing experience for communities, and it should always be a last resort, and it should always be in consultation with the communities moving. And finally, we have solutions for people already on the move. These are people displaced, where we can look at humanitarian relief aid, for example. We are also looking at granting or expediting or waiving visas in situations of disasters when people have to move over the night across the border, for example. We are also looking at policies to not force the return of people into a country that is facing disasters. For example, if somebody has their visa expired, they should not be forced to return to a country that is experiencing a disaster at the moment. And of course, we look at reintegration strategies and contingency planning as well. At policy level, there are over 28 fields of policy that address this topic. Here I only put a few examples and a few logos, but in a mapping that we've done in 2018 in Iran, we counted over 28 fields that deal with this topic. Today, we're mostly going to focus on the climate change policy and negotiations, but it would be important to acknowledge that also the migration policy field has advanced quite a lot on this, especially with the endorsement of the Global Compact for Safe, Regular, and Orderly Migration in 2018. And finally, the legal approach. This is where you've already seen in the quiz that there is no international convention specifically for environmental migrants. But we know that the Convention on the Status of Refugees of 1951 does not apply to people moving in the context of the environment. The environment is not one of the 5 reasons of persecution for refugees. Nevertheless, international human rights law applies on the basis of universality, the principle of universality. So people are still protected based on the human rights law. In the absence of a specific international convention, though, certain countries have developed national laws and policies or regional guidance on how to deal with environmental migration, because they have to face it on a daily basis. For example, Brazil has developed humanitarian visas for people arriving from Haiti in 2010 following the earthquake. In Central and North America, countries have developed a joint guide on how to deal with disaster displacement and environmental migration. And at the international level, the Nansen Initiative Protection Agenda puts forward the toolkit of how states could deal with disaster displacement cross borders. Now, going specifically into the climate change negotiations, I will give you a brief overview. I think the next speaker, Dennis, will also speak about this as well. So when we talk about climate change policies at a global level, we look at the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change and Paris Agreement. But we know that there's other global policies that address climate change as well, such as the UN Convention to Combat Desertification, the Biodiversity Convention as well, the United Nations Environment Programme. There's a lot of action around ocean policy as well. At the national level, when we talk about climate change policies, we talk about national adaptation plans, nationally determined contributions, and national communication. In a mapping that we've done in 2018, we have seen that the majority of national climate change policies do not include migration effects. Most maps include human mobility, but most NDCs do not include human mobility. Because I am talking from IOM, I would like to perhaps explain the IOM role in climate change negotiations as well. And our main role here is to provide technical support to state parties to UNFCCC and other actors as well. This basically means working directly with the climate change negotiators of states and providing them technical knowledge on human mobility and migration, displacement, and relocation. We also have a very active role in producing evidence on the links between migration and climate change, technical and operational guidance on how to address this topic, and also to share good practices from all over the world. We also play a convening role within the UN system on climate migration, together with the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. And we also look at strengthening the IOM UNFCCC collaboration and with other partners as well when we go to the climate change negotiations. I put here a graphic of the latest climate change conferences, so the COPs, to show you that, not to overwhelm you first of all, but to show you that migration has been part of the climate change negotiations for quite a while now. It dates back to COP16, where we first talk about migration in the adaptation agreement. This is back in 2010. And you can see that throughout the years, this topic has evolved all up to COP24 in 2018, where the Task Force on Displacement delivered its recommendations to the state parties of UNFCCC. IOM has been engaging in the climate change negotiations since 2007, and it's a member of the Task Force on Displacement under the Warsaw International Mechanism for Loss and Damage associated with climate change. And as I mentioned, at COP24, this task force delivered its recommendation on integrated approaches to avert, minimize, and address displacement associated with climate change. And these recommendations have been adopted by the UNFCCC parties. So what do the recommendations say? Here are the 10 key takeaways from IOM. So these are recommendations on human mobility in the context of climate change negotiations. And what is very important is that recommendations look at all forms of human mobility. Even though it's the task force on displacement, it looks at migration, so more voluntary forms of human mobility. It looks at displacement as a forced form of mobility, and also planned relocation. Recommendations also call on countries to address climate change and migration concerns when they formulate laws and policies and strategies on this topic. They also look at the national policies and tools to address climate migration concerns as well. They also call for policy coherence at the global level, so global climate policy to be connected with global migration policy. So imagine the Paris Agreement being connected with the Global Compact for Migration, for example. It also calls for migration and regular migration pathways to be considered in the context of climate change as a form of adaptation. It also tackles the issue of internal displacement, and it calls for a collaborative approach to take action on climate migration. Importantly, it puts an important role on the UNFCCC to continue to look into these issues and the United Nations system as well. So not only states, but the United Nations system as well. One limitation of these recommendations is that it does not elaborate on gender and human rights issues. Now, to finish, I would like to leave you with a word for COP26. We know COP26 has been postponed from last year to this year. It's going to take place in Glasgow at the beginning of November. So what's at stake at COP26 for human mobility? We know that states have been asked to submit nationally determined contributions, revised NDCs ahead of COP26, and we hope that a lot of these revised NDCs will include human mobility. We are also looking at building the support to operationalize the recommendations of the Task Force on Displacement that I just mentioned before. So we look at the Warsaw International Mechanism for Loss and Damage to call on states to operationalize these recommendations together with the UN system. And we're also looking at starting and building and strengthening the coherence between the work of the Task Force on Displacement and the work of the UN Network on Migration. In other words, between the Paris Agreement and the GCM implementations. If you would like more information about this, please visit our website, specifically on COP26 or the whole UNFCCC process. This is our website. You can find us on social media as well, and we also have a newsletter that you can subscribe. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Cynthiana. I think it was a very insightful presentation, and I guess all will agree that we have learned a lot from her presentation in the aspect of human mobility, specifically like when it comes to the nexus between migration, environmental degradation, and climate change. And there are a lot more conversations going on these environmental migrants. I guess your insights were really valuable to learn about them. More with more evidence, as well as based on the policy and other advocacy sort of an angle. So we have a few questions in the chat box, Cynthiana. I guess there is one question from your end. Would you like to answer? I mean, it's more or less like a comment, I guess. Would you like to address this now, or shall we keep it for the Q&A session?
We can keep it for the Q&A session. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So now next, our next speaker is actually from SLYCAN Trust. He's the director, as well as like he is one of the lead researchers who's like working specifically in the areas of human mobility, climate change, and environmental degradation on environmental management side. So let me just introduce Dennis Montreal from SLYCAN Trust, and he would have a lot to talk about it because he's a specialist in this angle, as well as he had been conducting many researches, had published many articles as well. He has his own blog as well as his own column in our national newspapers as well. So let me now invite Dennis to open with his session. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Anjita, and I hope everybody can hear me clearly. So my name is Dennis, and I'm Director of Research and Knowledge Management at SLYCAN Trust. And I think in the interest of time, I will try to keep my presentation relatively brief. There's indeed a lot to talk about, but since we also want to hear from everyone else in this webinar, we want to have some time left for the group work and discussion. So yeah, so I will quickly talk about policy dimensions related to climate change and human mobility. Since Jana already has given a great overview of the, what's happening under the UNFCCC process and how it connects to other processes on migration, and also what the Women's Task Force on Displacement under the Executive Committee are doing. So I will not go into too much detail on this. As we all know, I think the Paris Agreement has makes explicit reference to migration and has a recommendation to set up the task force under the Warsaw International Mechanism to develop recommendations, and these recommendations have been presented in 2018 at COP24 and will hopefully be operationalized in the near future. And there's a work stream under the Warsaw International Mechanism on human mobility specifically. So again, this I think was covered very comprehensively by Cynthiana, so I'm not going to go into detail on this. I want to talk a bit more about the nationally determined contributions, the NDCs, which are at the heart of the Paris Agreement and basically the commitments of countries to reduce emissions, their national emissions, and adapt to climate change impacts. And they are being now submitted. They were supposed to be submitted by 2020 in updated form or new form due to COVID. It has been a bit extended, so now we're talking about 2020 and 2021 submissions by the parties. So in the past, already it was counted. I think Tiziana mentioned this also. IOM did an assessment in 2016 with the first 162 submitted INDCs, and only 20% of those made some kind of reference to migration in some form. Most of those from African countries or the Asia Pacific region. And then as part of the work of the Task Force on Displacement, they did another assessment in 2018 with all 193 submitted NDCs from the first round. And all of those, the percentage remains the same, 20% made some kind of reference to migration. So now we have gone, our research team is going through the ones that have been submitted in 2020 and 2021 to see if this has changed in any way. We have an upcoming briefing note on this that will hopefully be published probably within this or the next week. And you can see here this overview of all the countries that have submitted their updated or new NDCs up to end of May 2021. And if they make any kind of reference to either migration, to disaster displacement, or to planned relocation. And you can see here the colored symbols outlining this. And still the majority of countries do not have any concrete commitments in the NDCs. So basically, these are all the countries that have some kind of mention or even some kind of provision in the NDCs that have been submitted in 2020 and 2021 to either migration, disaster displacement, or planned relocation. And you can also see the green box with the I stands for Annex 1 parties. Almost, with the exception of Russia, there's no Annex 1 party that has any kind of provision in the NDCs. Out of 87 parties that have submitted, that's counting the EU countries as separate parties, 27.5% refer to human mobility in some form, either as a reference to, for example, vulnerable groups or with concrete commitments or provisions. And the majority of these are from South America or Central America and the Caribbean. Lesser percentages from Africa and then Asia and Pacific region. And most include displacement in some form. There's 16 countries or 16 parties in total that have some mention of displacement. And there are 9 countries that have concrete provisions for planned relocation. But in total, if you count references and provisions, it's lower than displacement or migration it's being referred to. And there's one country that even has a sector on climate migration and its adaptation commitments, that's Papua New Guinea. That's so far in this new round the only country that has this in the NDCs. So this will be available soon. You can download it from our Knowledge Hub once it's out. We publish on our social media and everywhere. it's of course important to keep in mind that these are just the NDCs, and many countries have commitments or have plans to address climate change and human mobility, for example, their national adaptation plans, in their migration policies, or in other sectoral policies and plans. Cynthiana already gave an overview of how climate mobility connects to all these different areas. So this is just an overview of sectors that have relevance. For example, Sri Lanka has a policy on national migrant health policy that has some reference to natural disasters as a cause of displacement. There are labor migration policies that can reference climate change directly. It can be in policies related to the agriculture sector, for example, to SDGs and development commitments. It can be in social protection policies, those referring to social cohesion. It can be in environmental policies and plans related to environmental degradation, both for the origin areas and areas where migrants move to. And it can also relate to education, to risk management, and of course, to directly into the climate commitments, climate policies, or climate-related plans. So this is basically how it is on the global level. We as SLYCAN Trust do both this policy kind of work and then also on the ground work to get evidence to actually connect the global process to things happening on the ground in like on the community level and the national level, national policies, and then also data collection on the ground. And I will very, very briefly go to a case study from Sri Lanka. Basically, there are these four mainstreams of human mobility. That's internal migration, for example, for marriage, for jobs. There's temporal disaster displacement by floods and landslides. There is departures of foreign employment, which is a big source of remittances and foreign currency. And there's cyclical economic migration, seasonal economic migration, mostly from rural areas to urban areas in agricultural off-seasons that are affected by water scarcity and drought. And yeah, Sri Lanka has the highest relative risk of being displaced by disasters in all of South Asia. 1 in 5 people is an inter-district migrant, 1 in 7 inter-province migrant. And the main reason usually cited for migration is economic reasons. Let's see how I'm doing with the time. Okay, so this is basically an expanded version of what I just talked about. There we can see all the different impacts of sudden onset disasters, of slow onset disasters and processes such as drought, soil degradation, saline intrusion, pests and diseases, invasive species. All of these have impacts on agriculture and other livelihoods, and that can lead to either adaptation measures that help build resilience and adapt to this, or to permanent internal migration, to seasonal migration, to going abroad. And we also need to keep in mind those staying behind, which in many cases women, children, the elderly, and those with special needs, and how they are addressed by migration-related policies and plans. If there's any provision to address the issues that exist based on largely men moving to cities or abroad, and the family members staying behind. Sri Lanka in its nationally determined contributions, Sri Lanka has not committed the new one yet. This is the first round, 2016 submitted, has a loss and damage sector. And in the sector commits to establishing a local mechanism in line with the WIM, and also to analyze total loss and damages of climate-induced disasters, and also to make recommendations to contribute under the WIM. Yes.
Yes, okay.
Yeah, so I was unmuted by the host. Muted by the host. I don't know, maybe by mistake. Okay, I hope you can still hear me. So now, I believe in the new updated NDCs, there is a reference to migration specifically, but I have not seen the updated loss and damage sector. So we have to wait for the submission, which should happen soon. But this reference to the national mechanism in line with the international mechanism for loss and damage is something that in the updated study we haven't seen in a lot of other countries. And I think it's an interesting approach to handle this, because of course it would include human mobility as one of the major work streams and connect to the work of the task force. Yeah, so I think in the interest of time, I will skip this a bit. This is a case study we did on the ground with a number of villages in the dry zone east of Sri Lanka in Trincomalee. Where most farmers experience droughts and shifts in rainfall patterns and water scarcity. And in the villages we surveyed, 80% had a family member who had migrated away. 72% was a husband, in a few cases, sons, daughters, or wives. And only 20% of households surveyed didn't have a single member who had migrated to the city, either temporarily or on a long-term basis. And the destination was almost always Colombo, if not Colombo, then another big city like Kandy or Vaunia. And those staying behind, mostly women, they did report financial problems, they did report lack of proper income. Some were attempting home gardening, but many had issues due to the water scarcity. And others were trying to keep up the paddy farming, the traditional livelihood, but all that issues with that due to the lack of efficiency of traditional risk sharing, lack of access and control. And many reported impacts on education, nutrition, on child development, and on physical and mental health of themselves or family members, for example, elderly family members, who then suddenly had an additional burden of looking after children or trying to provide additional income. So you can download this case study on our page on the Adaptation Resilience Knowledge Hub that we have. It details the findings from this case study that we did. We also have this policy brief that goes through the policies, laws, and processes in Sri Lanka, not just the NDCs and the National Adaptation Plan, but also the climate policy and everything related to climate change, disaster management, and migration, and sees how climate mobility is integrated into these processes. And then together with IOM Sri Lanka, we also had a consultation that resulted in this working paper that goes into more detail on separate sectors, on water resource and irrigation, on the health sector, on ecosystem and biodiversity, and also on gender and vulnerable communities and how they connect to climate mitigation in Sri Lanka. So if you're interested in this, I would recommend to check it out. I will now wrap this up. Again, the study on the updated NDCs will be out soon. And if you're interested, please reach out to us or follow us on social media. I think it's interesting to see that the percentage has increased a bit from the previous studies, from 20% up to 27.5%. Also, of course, we need to keep in mind that this is not all NDCs. So it's only a number of countries have submitted. Final conclusions we can only draw after all parties have submitted their updated NDCs. All right, thank you very much. Sorry for the background noise, it's working from home. And I will give it now back to Ranjita and the Q&A, and then hopefully the group work. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dennis. I think it was a very fruitful presentation, and you just made this time so interesting by providing so many examples and case studies from across the globe. And I mean, you have actually given some thoughts to Sri Lankan cases as well, which is a very good thing. And I see many of you have commented, and I think it'll be a very good interactive session. So just to save time, shall we just give the floor now to Sinashia from SLYCAN Trust to kind of organize and operate and do all sorts of activities with this Q&A session. Over to you, Sinashia.
Thanks so much, Rangita, and thank you very much to Dennis and Cynthiana for your presentations. In the interest of time, we will be limiting the number of questions that we are going to take, but however, please do drop them on the chat, and our panelists will be more than happy to respond on the chat. We will take one question for the moment, that is from Miss Dilanti from the University of Rohde. And she had said migration can lead to conflicts with host communities. Don't we need to address such repercussions to make migration a trade-off? I'm wondering if maybe both the panelists could very briefly, in about a minute and a half's time, address this. So we could probably start off with Dennis and then move to Cynthiana to address this briefly, and then we'll move on. Thank you.
Yeah, okay, sure. So I think, I mean, the answer to that is definitely yes. I think we need to look at it from all perspectives, not just the perspective of the migrants, but also, as I mentioned, the perspective of those staying behind and of host communities. So I think that's a big challenge also in addressing climate mobility, that it is not just one area and one group that we need to address, but it's cross-cutting across the whole region or even across borders. And there's definitely a potential for conflicts between host communities and migrant communities, for example, over resources or environmental ecosystem services. And this can be seen in many countries also. So I think it's very important to get these perspectives from all sides and to try to have a holistic way to address this across different sectors. And I think this can be achieved through policies and plans, but of course, the foundation for that needs to be first to actually understand the situation and get evidence from the ground to understand who is affected in which way, and not just economically affected, but also affected in their well-being, in their health, in their social cohesion, in all these different aspects, and then try to find a solution for that across different areas. So yes, my answer to this would be definitely yes, we need to look at the host communities as well, as we need to look at the communities staying behind and those who are moving.
Thanks so much, Dennis. Cynthia, would you like to very quickly comment on this? And also for the questions on the chat, I would kindly request the speakers to also respond directly on the chat, and so we could step in the interest of time. Cynthia.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. It's a great question. I think Dennis had a perfect answer. So I would perhaps only talk about some of the work that we've been doing on reintegration, for example. So we look at returning migrants and how IOM can support their reintegration into the host communities exactly to prevent conflict with the host community that the question was posed. So we are addressing the repercussions of returning migration, for example, back to the host communities. We're also looking at the reintegration and resettlement packages for the host communities on the other side as well, not just the origin country. And I think this is an issue for all types of migration. It's not specific to environmental migration. What could be interesting from the point of environmental policy, for example, what we've been doing now in quite a few countries, looking at green reintegration packages. So making an environment where migrants and host communities can both work together for climate change sensible projects. For example, in Niger, we are working on rent rehabilitation with returning migrants and the host community. In Senegal, we are working on coastal restoration with migrants and the host community. So kind of bringing together the migrants, reintegrating them together with the host community via environmental or green packages. So this is a way that we are addressing this. But again, this is not specific to environmental migration. I think there's many links. For example, I saw a question on COVID-19, and there's many links to other issues as well, with conflict in general, when people move, those due to conflict and disasters, for example, or now with COVID, when people move or cannot move because of COVID, but they have to move because of the disasters, so to save their life. So there's many other links that are specific to environmental migration. Thank you for the question. I look forward to the breakout groups. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Viviana, and thank you to everyone who submitted the questions. I'm very sorry that we can't take them now, but for the two panelists, I would kindly request you to respond to as many as you can in the chat. However, we will also follow up on email. So we're going to quickly go into another Mentimeter. It's not a quiz, but this time around, we just want to pick your brains a bit. And let me just really share my screen. You should, if you log on to menti.com and use the code 3401025, use the same code as last time, and just to type in as fast as you can on what you think of when it comes to human mobility in the context of climate change. So yes, so we'll leave this Menti open for about 3 minutes before we go into our breakout sessions. And I am very sorry that we cannot take any more questions directly. However, if you just drop it in the chat, we will make sure that these questions are responded to, and we could get back to you all on email. Thank you very much. So we are starting to get a few responses. You could type in as many as you want. So when you think of human mobility in the context of climate change, so it's loss of land, vulnerable groups, poverty, food security, women and children, disasters, loss of identity, social protection, skill development. Sorry, we have a few more. Farmers, droughts, coastal lines and sea level rise, livelihoods, protection of children, rising sea levels, droughts. Okay, so lack of options. Okay, a better understanding of the impacts and of disasters and climate change on human mobility is essential for attempting to introduce appropriate short, medium, and long-term solutions to populations that can be potentially affected. Domestic workers, social relationships, immobility, trapped populations, degrading natural resources. So thank you very much. We're just going to keep this open for just another minute. So we could have a few more answers coming in. Right. And with that, you could keep, I know we have a hand that's raised, but I am very sorry, in the interest of time, I don't think we could take that up. If you could perhaps leave your email address, Dr. Hassan, we could probably reach out to you if that's okay. Thank you. So we're going to open out.
No problem. I will
Thank
do
you
that.
very much. I apologize once again. Great. Okay. So we are right. So we're going to open up the breakout groups, and in the breakout groups, you'll be assigned automatically into 3. And within your breakout groups, if you don't have a facilitator already, I would kindly like to request you all to appoint a facilitator, or if someone is willing to volunteer to become facilitator, that's even better. And also have a note taker. We have our team members also joining who will help with the note taking. And also, please do remember, we have a report back session in about, I would like to say, 18 to 20 minutes time, hopefully more, just to try and stick to the time limit that we have. So please, if the facilitator or moderator of the group is not willing to present, please do have someone from the group ready for presenting as well. Right, so we will be opening the breakout rooms now, and you should see a pop-up message. And so please do please do join the room when the message comes up. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. We're just going to give it about another half a minute more.
Hello. Hello.
Yes. Hello. We are just going to give it another half a minute more until everyone just comes back from the breakout rooms, and then we'll have a quick report back. Okay, so thank you very much. I know we had limited time for the breakout rooms, and I'm very sorry about that, but I hope your sessions were fruitful and beneficial, and you had a lot of productive discussion going on. So in the interest of time, I do understand we're several minutes over time. So in the interest of time, what we will do is perhaps ask all of the groups to present maybe 2 to 3 key main points from your discussion. From the Miro board. So perhaps if someone who is able to share their screen shares the Miro board that they're discussing. So everyone is able to have a look at it, but the presenter could maybe elaborate just on 2 to 3 key points and also try to keep the presentation to about 2 minutes. So yes, so we'll start off with group 1. I believe that was with Rangita and Vasita. If maybe someone from group 1 could share their screen first, that with the Miro board, that would be great.
Yes, I'm sharing it.
Thanks, Tatsha. Tatsha, would you know who is presenting from your group?
Ruvani will present about that.
Great. Okay, fine. Thank you. Can see your screen, Tatsha. Ruvani?
Yes. So we had quite a good discussion within our group with Vasita, Rangika, and a few other other members of the group. So when we're speaking on the first question, we spoke on localizing the SDG indicators and involvement of all stakeholders, like the youth and all in terms of gender as well. And then we went in to speak trying to avoid the problem rather than finding solutions for migration, which I think is very interesting and which relates to different parts of the world in very different ways. So it won't be a blanket policy, but it would be something that is very specific for each of the countries. And also we spoke on we spoke on the vulnerability aspects and how these individuals are vulnerable to quite a broad spectrum of things. So yeah, that is just an idea of what we spoke of, Shanashia. So I'm just going to hand it over back to you.
Thanks so much. And just so that everyone know, we will be incorporating these as well as responses that you gave during the mentee session to a document much later. All right, so let's move on to group 2 very quickly. Thank you, group 1, for sticking to time. So who will be sharing the screen from group 2? Yes, hi, Dennis. Will you be presenting as well, or? Okay.
Yes, as you can see from the Miro board, we had a good discussion. Krishna was the one who facilitated it, and I think we had good input. I will just stick to 2 highlights because otherwise we don't have time for anything. So I think what came up a couple of times is like this whole issue of working in silos and not policies not being coordinated or coherent. So we have here a challenge on the international side, policy coherence, working in silos. We have the DRR communities, the migration people, we have the climate change people. And of course, there are many efforts to connect these, but it's still, I think, there's scope to do more and have stronger connections between these different areas and processes. And same on the national level, we have different sectors, different geographical areas, different stakeholder groups, including indigenous people also, that need to be recognized and be part of that conversation. And I think the second part that came out also was to strengthen capacities on the national level of the national actors and subnational actors, and to give them a platform to provide input and report their issues and maybe even provide data from their own experience. And I think that's an important point also, that it's not just the government's job to do this alone, but that communities, indigenous communities, even like the private sector, local government, all these different entities, CSOs, NGOs, should be involved, and that local capacities, national capacities need to be built for these actors to do things in their own sphere of influence, and that then connect to national plans, processes, and actions, and one level higher to the international level. I think, yeah, 2 highlights. Keep it at that.
Okay, thanks so much, Dennis. And finally, we move on to my group. Sorry, I'll maybe share my screen. All right. Sorry, Seja, we had someone volunteering to.
Yes, we had, yeah. Okay, yeah, so thank you so very much. I actually wanted to share from my side because I was also opening it. Okay, so here we had quite an interesting discussion, and we highlighted some points. Yeah, but the key things we talked about, first of all, for the first one, looking at the international organizations that have to do with climate change, to identify the policy processes there that have to do with climate migration, like the UNFCCC. And then we also talked about the country context, so where each of the countries would also focus on what they can do within their countries to include the climate mobility and climate migration. Then some other points we highlighted on the enhancing the legal framework for climate migrants, and of course the informal settlement. For the challenges to be addressed in the first one, we talked about migrated communities, which are often those who are marginalized, and then combining it with peace and development, how we could use this to also build peace within the country. For the second question that has to do with how climate-related human mobility will be integrated in national plans, yes, we talked about taking a sectoral approach where these issues would not be from a national level that takes a more broader outlook, but it could be focusing from the regions, because these regions, they understand more what the patterns are in terms of climate migration and mobility. So they would be in a better position to help. And then the stakeholders from there would also conclude. And another one, which I would include finally, is the NDC contributions. It's also very important as a way of doing this from the national level. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I know we are now 40 minutes over time. So thank you very much. I'm wondering maybe very quickly before we go, if everyone would be willing to perhaps turn on their cameras and we could just take a quick screenshot of what was here. Just very quickly, just take a few screenshots and share that with you as well. We just give it about 10 seconds more for everyone to turn on their cameras. Okay, all right, everyone, big smiles. So we took the screenshot, so keep smiling. Okay, great. So I took a few screenshots. So thank you very much, everybody, for participating and for staying on until this late. We're very sorry about going over time. So thank you very much for joining. Rangita, do you have any closing remarks?
Yes, thank you very much, Sinashia, and thank you very much, everybody, like for contributing with a lot of insights and a lot of thoughts, as well as contributing to one of the key discussion points facing this Environment Day. Let me just thank all of you for coming on board and then volunteering their support to discuss more on this, as well as I want to thank immensely to Cinziana for being our speaker today, and all, I mean, just leaving apart all her busy schedule, she was like so good in providing us all sorts of insights on policy and advocacy, as well as I must immensely thank our next speaker, Dennis. He had been providing a lot of insights with case examples, and I mean, across the globe, he had already been very active in this process with SLYCAN's presence. Meanwhile, Sandashia, great job, and thank you very much for getting along with everybody and then providing us some sort of an interactive session today. I guess we have come to the end of this session, and I hope all of you will be there with us for our next upcoming sessions as well. And after this session, we will be circulating a Google form or maybe a Microsoft form to obtain your feedback on this session, and kindly stay in touch with all of us. So thank you.
Nita, you can share the questionnaires that which are we discussing in Google form, so we can more add an point. That's maybe short time duration we're not able to more improper. So you can share that Google form in that those two questions, so people can add more points. That will
Yes,
be,
of course.
yeah. Thanks.
Yes, please go ahead, Rakesh. Yes.
Yeah, that's why I'm saying this. Okay.
Yeah.
You can share that where people can add, and like because the situation in India, like some people not working like in job, and some people are like not in office, so internet connectivity not good. That so sometimes you have to get a bit hard. Okay.
Definitely. Thank you very much, Rakesh. So we will be actually sending out this. You could just post. Anyways, like there were some questions by some of the respondents, but then we were not able to take them up. So always you could just post all your questions to us. Thank you very much. Bye-bye, colleagues.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Goodbye, everybody.
All right, for everyone, right, well done.